What is really going on? Because this is alarming to say the least. Norfolk Southern striking a deal. Now, we had recent reports just a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, about the possibility of these railroad worker union strikes between Norfolk Southern, BNSF, CSX, Union Pacific, several others going on strike for improved wages and improved time off, which is a very important topic of discussion here, folks, especially as we talk about the residents of Ohio. As you can see here on this Reuters report, this news headline, Norfolk Southern strike a deal on crash evidence. Now, let's get into this, folks. Reuters, February 27, Ohio residents are suing Norfolk Southern Corporation. No surprise there. They will get an extra day to inspect rail cars that spilled a toxic chemical during a train derailment this month before the company clears the crash site, according to a deal struck by parties on Monday. Now, attorneys for the residents and Norfolk Southern told U.S. District Judge Benita Yolanda Pearson in Youngstown, Ohio, that the residents' experts would have 3 days to inspect 5 rail cars from the train carrying vinyl chloride, a highly flammable and carcinogenic gas, instead of the original plan 2. Now, the derailment of the Norfolk Southern operated train in East Palestine on February 3 ignited a fire that spewed a cloud of smoke over the town, forcing thousands of residents to evacuate while railroad crews drained and burned off toxic chemicals. The vinyl chloride, which is used in making plastic products, can cause dizziness, headaches, and drowsiness when inhaled in the short term, and a rare form of liver cancer after chronic exposure. And this is according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. And in a letter sent on Thursday to attorneys for nearby residents who have filed over a dozen class action lawsuits claiming that the fiery crash put their health and property at risk, Norfolk Southern had said it would begin removing and destroying the cars after March 1. Are they trying to get rid of evidence? Meanwhile, and they promised to allow those residents and their representatives 2 days to inspect the damage beforehand. The residents filed motions on Friday asking Pearson to stop the company from destroying what they said was important evidence. This is a catch-22 because not only is it important evidence, but you pose a severe health risk by putting yourself close proximity to these dangerous chemicals. Now, it says that the EPA on Saturday announced it was temporarily pausing Norfolk Southern's shipment of material from the crash site, but promised those efforts would resume soon. Definitely seems like a mess that they want to get cleaned up relatively quickly before any more information is divulged to the public. Meanwhile, Greece train crash kills 57 people, confirmed dead as public anger grows. And understandably, the Greek rail workers extend strike in protest against train accident. Why are these accidents happening? Why are these trains constantly derailing and causing people risks to their lives, their health, families losing loved ones? Well, the rail workers never stopped fighting for paid sick days, folks, and now the persistence is actually paying off for some. Now, this is a report from February 10th, but I want to read to you what has developed since the kibosh was put on the U.S. railroad workers, the Railway Freight Workers Union strikes between BNSF, Union Pacific, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett owns BNSF, Norfolk Southern, CSX, and others, as Congress and Biden signed into law making it illegal for these railroad workers to strike. Now, it says here that it seems like a done deal just 2 months ago, but rail workers had brought the country to the brink of a national rail shutdown over the fact that they didn't have paid sick leave and wouldn't get any in the contract that they were negotiating with their bosses, the massive freight railroad companies. But then Congress stepped in to end the impasse. Strike averted. Yeah, strike averted, but they didn't really get a chance to really fight for what they believed was right. And this has been going on for years. And they hadn't received a pay raise, and they hadn't received the ability to have sick leave, take time off to tend to their healthcare needs, only at the expense of keeping this railroad running and making these billionaires even richer. Now, through a bipartisan vote, lawmakers imposed a contract that gave workers a substantial raise but no paid sick days. And in rail yards across the country, workers felt deflated and defeated. But I think they felt something else, potentially tired and maybe not operating at 100%. And it says that here is America's essential workers, rail workers. We have no paid sick days, and this is according to Matthew Weaver, a railroad carpenter in Toledo, Ohio, just after the vote. It's disgusting. Fast forward to this week, one of the largest freight railroads in the world, CSX, announced a deal with two rail unions, including Weaver's, to provide 4 days of paid sick leave annually, plus the option of converting 3 personal days into additional paid sick time. That's a plus. And it's very exciting. It's a good faith effort to show that we're essential employees rather than expendable, is what Weaver said, and it gives me hope. I'm happy to hear that. Now, it says that how did CSX become the first freight railroad to offer paid sick leave? Well, CSX has agreed to so far only cover about 5,000 workers, but the rail carrier says it's pursuing similar agreements with the other rail unions. And the White House took some credit for the developments, with Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre telling reporters on Thursday that the deals follow continued advocacy and involvement from the Biden administration. Perhaps he's not so bad after all. But CSX President and CEO Joe Hinrichs describes a turn of events that started from within. Hinrichs, who started at CSX last September, says that even as the freight railroads as a group remain staunchly opposed to paid sick leave, he was in discussions at the multi-billion-dollar company about doing something different once the national negotiations were over. And during his 3 decades in the auto industry, Hinrichs saw workers get allowances for absences that can be used for various purposes, including if they wake up sick. And in rail, workers must get approved far in advance for any paid personal sick days that they take. There's no calling in sick the morning of your shift. This is something very important that we need to remember as we progress through this video, folks. Now, it says that it's really difficult, of course, to pre-approve sickness when you don't know when you're going to be sick, right? I mean, it's not like they planned it like C-19, but hey, his first couple months on the job were punctuated by union votes on the contract, and he watched as 4 of the 12 rail unions voted it down, citing the lack of paid sick leave as a driving factor. Now, all these freight railroads had been suffering from a shortage of workers, in part because they all furloughed a lot of workers at the start of the pandemic, and workers didn't come back, and for good reason. And as the negotiations ground on, the employees they did have were speaking out loudly about the lack of paid sick leave and gaining broad public support. The issue was becoming a liability for the rail industry. And there's no doubt that the railroad industry overall didn't get improvements to its image by what transpired over those several months. And this is according to Hinrichs. And in December, after the new contract had gone into effect, Hinrichs and other senior CSX executives sat down with leaders from the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees and restarted the conversation over paid sick leave. So basically, they nipped the strike in the bud, but they didn't leave them high and dry because they wanted to continue the conversations. Meanwhile, this week, the union and one other became the first to strike a deal. And I will say that these folks did get their retroactive pay, and that's a plus because I have been in communication with a lot of railroad workers since reporting on this matter, and it seems as though they did actually get their retroactive pay. But it says here, according to Hinrichs, if we want to change, if we are going to make a difference, we have to try new things. And it says that famously progressive Senator Bernie Sanders was joined by Republican Senator Mike Braun of Indiana on Thursday in challenging CEOs of other freight rail companies to follow suit. This is where it gets good, folks. And at a time of record-breaking profits, that industry can and must guarantee at least 7 paid sick days to every rail worker in America. That's what Bernie Sanders said. And in the year 2023, that is not a whole lot to ask for. Not with the amount of money that these folks are making, folks. Come on now. Billions upon billions, hand over fist. And a handful of his colleagues across the aisle seem to agree. Just before the Senate voted to impose the rail contract without sick leave, there had been a vote on a separate bill that gave rail workers 7 days of paid sick time. 6 Republicans, including Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and Braun, had gotten on board, but the measure fell short of the 60 votes it needed to clear the Senate. Those of us in Congress, according to Sanders, who voted for 7 days, we are not going to forget this issue, is what he said. And he said that he hoped the railroads would act voluntarily, but, quote, if they don't, I look forward to seeing them right here in the Senate committee room, end quote. Now, in fact, more discussions are already underway, with unions reporting they have reopened negotiations with other freight railroads to add paid sick leave, but many rank and file workers are bracing for what they all have been asked to give up in return. While the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees says that the union gave no concessions in its deal with CSX. Asked to confirm that, CSX Hendricks said, and I quote, "It is true that the workers themselves did not give anything to help pay for these benefits," end quote. Now, folks, this is a shocking development that we have here, which is good news for some, but bad news for others. And let me explain to you why. It's good news for the CSX employees who receive these paid sick days off without having to give up anything in return, but it's bad news for others. For instance, particularly others who work for railroads and on unions for Norfolk Southern who haven't received these paid sick days off and perhaps could have played a part in the most recent catastrophic train derailments that have caused so much harm to the people of East Palestine, Ohio. And now, folks, another Norfolk train derails, with Bupe sending me this recent update as she's been doing her research from Zambia in Africa, helping me to bring you guys the most current information and, most importantly, the truth. Shows that within the space of a month, Norfolk is experiencing 2 train derailments, with the other being on February 3rd, which saw the exposure of hazardous materials, and the latest taking place yesterday around 5 p.m. Now, even though the Clark County Emergency Agency is an update said officials are working to make sure no hazardous materials were involved, the agency has asked residents within 1,000 feet of the derailment to shelter in place.
Good morning. Another Norfolk Southern train derailing last night in Springfield, Ohio, 1 month after the toxic train derailment in East Palestine. Last night's incident in Springfield, about 230 miles west of the first incident, prompting officials to declare a temporary shelter in place for everyone within 1,000 feet of the train. That order is now lifted as both Norfolk Southern and the Springfield Fire Department say nobody was injured and no hazardous materials were on board at the time of the incident.
There is no indication of any injuries or risk to the public health at this time. The crew from owner-operator of the Railway Norfolk Southern, Clark County Hazmat Team, and the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency each independently examined the crash site and verified there was no evidence of spillage at the site.
Ohio Governor Mike DeWine says President Biden and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg called him to offer help from the federal government.
There has been no formal evacuation ordered yet. Now, I would be fairly concerned about this shelter in place and the evacuation and the plans that they intend to put in place based on what had recently happened in East Palestine, Ohio, and the complete and total lack of regard for the health and safety of the residents. Meanwhile, only focused on the profitability of Norfolk Southern, the company, and trying to sweep this under the rug as quickly and as silently and secretly as possible.
19 train derailments over the past month. That's what's been experienced nationwide. You can take a quick look at what's happened since December of 2022 across the country. Now, the hard thing is putting it into context. We've been wondering how many train derailments, does the United States experience on an annual or average basis?
This is a staggering number, which I have to believe because our producers do great research. And this is the stat from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. From 1990 to 2021, so roughly 30 years, 54,000 train derailments, 54,539 is the stat. If you break that down, that breaks down to about 150 train derailments in America a month.
But that doesn't mean that it's like 159 East Palestine type
Totally.
derailment.
It
It could be something smaller.
barely off the tracks, maintenance issue, I don't know.
But
tiny stuff, presumably, but that is
it
still
does
a
bring up a
staggering number.
great question, though, about think about how much money we've spent in infrastructure, over the past 30 years, in particular, one that was, the infrastructure bill that was signed just this past summer. I mean, we are America. We're supposed to be the #1 country in the world. We can figure this stuff out technologically if only our infrastructure money wasn't going to racist roads and dumb climate projects. Maybe we could fix this problem.
Like to think so. Like to think we could get the trains figuratively and metaphorically on the tracks in this country. But
Running on
running on time, staying on the tracks.
Now, they say that this has also been a report about 1,500 people temporarily lost their power during this period. And we've got some clips here that we're going to look over that shows some of the footage from this train derailment and the possible damages and potentially hazardous materials that could have been compromised in this rail train derailment. But folks, here's what's most important. What is being done to prevent this from happening again? What is being done to prevent this from happening more and possibly injuring and hurting and harming more people long term? Over profits, over the precision railroad system, over this PSR, and the fact that these Norfolk Southern, these Union Pacific, these BNSF railroad union workers aren't allowed the ability to take time off and tend to their own healthcare needs and have paid sick time off without being negatively impacted and reprimanded and or retaliated against by these companies. Now, I think that this has a lot more to do with the fact that these workers are being overworked and they are stretching themselves thin, burning the candle at both ends, trying to run these skeleton crews, running them faster, running them looser, and not really paying attention to what matters most: safety, health, and people making it home at the end of the night. But folks, hey, Norfolk Southern, perhaps maybe they're only worried about one thing. You know what that is. I'm going to continue to keep an eye on this and update you guys as more information becomes available. If there's anything that you have that you'd like to share, then by all means, please feel free to reach out to me and contact me. A lot of folks have been sending me emails and even contacting me on Instagram. So feel free, by all means. I really do appreciate it. So let's bring this information to light. Let's shed light on the truth, and let's help these people of East Palestine, Ohio, and now in this of Clark County, and also others that could potentially be at risk, especially if you live, folks, near these commercial freight train railway lines. I want you guys to be paying attention. I want you guys to be aware. I want you guys to be prepared and perhaps maybe ready to move if you need to get out and evacuate at a moment's notice. The last thing I want to do is be subject to the shelter-in-place laws and mandates and restrictions set on me by my local government that obviously doesn't care about me, but only cares about themselves and their money and keeping secrets. But hey, that's just me. Folks, please keep your head in the swivel, be safe, watch your six, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Stay frosty.